I paid for the whole family Christmas trip, then my son demanded $75,000 for a new car. It felt like someone stabbed me straight through the chest. The same son I had spent years lifting from rock bottom looked me dead in the eyes and said those words that would change everything. Today, I'm going to tell you something I never thought I would share. And if for even a second this feels familiar, I only ask that you like this video and subscribe. It will help me keep opening my heart. My name is Eleanor, and I'm 72 years old. I live in a small one-bedroom apartment in Queens, New York City, where the subway rattles beneath my feet every morning at 6:30 sharp. The smell of roasted chestnuts from the street vendors below usually brings me comfort, mixing with the aroma of my morning coffee and the distant sounds of a city that never sleeps. But that December morning, nothing could comfort the ache that had been growing in my chest for months. I was wearing my favorite burgundy cardigan, the one my late husband Robert had bought me for our 40th anniversary. My fingers traced the small pearl buttons as I sat at my kitchen table, staring at the stack of receipts spread before me like accusations. Flight confirmations to Miami. Hotel reservations. Restaurant deposits. Car rental agreements. Every single piece of paper represented another sacrifice, another chunk of my modest pension fund disappearing into what I had convinced myself was love. The apartment was quiet except for the hum of the refrigerator and the occasional honking from the street below. Sunlight filtered through my thin curtains, casting long shadows across the worn linoleum floor. I had been awake since 4 in the morning, unable to sleep, replaying the conversation that had shattered my world just 24 hours earlier. Let me take you back to that moment, that Christmas trip that was supposed to be perfect. Every December, I lived for our family Christmas trip. It was my tradition, my gift to everyone I loved. This year, like every year before, I had spent weeks planning every detail. Flights for 8 people from New York to Miami. A beach house rental in South Beach with enough bedrooms for everyone. Dinner reservations at the finest restaurants. Activities for the grandchildren. Everything paid for by me, funded by the small fortune I had accumulated over decades of careful investing in stocks and bonds. You see, Robert and I had been smart with our money. We had invested in the stock market during good times, even put some money into Bitcoin when everyone said we were too old to understand cryptocurrency. Our wealth in dollars had grown steadily over the years, and after Robert passed 5 years ago, I found myself with more money than I knew what to do with. So I did what felt natural. I shared it with my family. That Christmas morning in Miami, I watched my family around the breakfast table in our rented beach house. My son Jake, 38 years old, was scrolling through his phone while his wife Sandra fed their twin boys. My daughter Lisa had flown in from Los Angeles with her teenage daughter Clara, my precious granddaughter who still hugged me tight and called me Grandma Ellie. My younger son Michael sat with his girlfriend, quietly eating his eggs Benedict that I had specially ordered from the nearby restaurant. The morning sun streamed through the floor-to-ceiling windows, illuminating the white sand beach beyond. Palm trees swayed gently in the breeze, and I could hear the rhythmic sound of waves crashing against the shore. It was picture perfect, exactly what I had envisioned when I booked this trip 6 months earlier. But then came the moment that changed everything. Jake pushed his chair back from the table, the scraping sound sharp against the tile floor. His dark eyes, so much like his father's, found mine across the room. But there was no warmth in them, no gratitude, no love. Just expectation. "Mom, I need to talk to you," he said, motioning toward the empty balcony overlooking the ocean. I followed him outside, my bare feet cold against the concrete. The salty breeze lifted my gray hair, and for a moment, I felt peaceful. This was what paradise was supposed to feel like. This was what I had worked so hard to give them. Jake leaned against the railing, his expensive designer shirt catching the morning light. I had paid for that shirt during one of his many financial emergencies. Just like I had paid for his apartment deposit when he lost his job 2 years ago. Just like I had paid for his wedding when he couldn't afford the venue Sandra wanted. Just like I had paid for everything, always, without question. He turned to face me, and I saw something in his expression that made my stomach clench. It was the same look he had given me as a child when he wanted something he knew he shouldn't ask for. But this wasn't a toy or a video game. This was my grown son, a father himself, about to ask for something that would break my heart. "Mom, I need $75,000 for a new car." The words hit me like a physical blow. The ocean breeze suddenly felt arctic, and I gripped the balcony railing to steady myself. $75,000. The same amount I had just spent on this entire family vacation without batting an eye. "Jake, that's a lot of money," I stammered, my voice barely audible over the sound of the waves below. He didn't even blink. "I know it sounds like a lot, but Mom, you don't understand the kind of pressure I'm under. My current car is embarrassing. Sandra's friends all drive luxury SUVs, and I need something that matches my position at the company. It's an investment, really. Image matters in business." I stared at my son, this man I had carried in my womb for 9 months, nursed through countless childhood illnesses, cheered for at every baseball game and school play. The same son I had bailed out of credit card debt 3 times in the past 5 years. The same son who hadn't called me on my birthday last year, or the year before that. But Jake, this trip alone cost me almost $40,000. I'm not working anymore, you know. I'm living on a fixed income. His face hardened, and I saw a flash of irritation that sent chills down my spine. Mom, you have plenty of money. Robert left you well off, and I know you've been smart about investments. This isn't about you not having the money. This is about whether you care enough about my success to help me. The manipulation was so subtle, so practiced, that for a moment I almost fell for it. Almost. But something deep inside me, some small voice that had been growing louder over the past year, whispered that this wasn't right. This wasn't how love was supposed to work. Let me think about it, I said quietly, turning to go back inside. But Jake grabbed my arm, his grip firm enough to leave marks. There's nothing to think about, Mom. I need an answer by tomorrow. The dealer has another buyer interested, and if I don't move fast, I'll lose the car. I looked into his eyes, searching for any trace of the little boy who used to climb into my lap when he was scared, who used to bring me dandelions from the backyard and call them beautiful flowers. But all I saw was cold calculation and entitlement. That night, as the rest of the family laughed and played games in the living room, I sat alone on the beach. The moonlight turned the waves silver, and I clutched a faded photograph that I always carried in my purse. It was from 12 years ago, Robert and me standing on this very beach during our anniversary trip. We were smiling, his arm around my waist, my head resting on his shoulder. We looked so happy, so complete. What would you do, Bobby? I whispered to the photograph, tears blurring my vision. How did we raise a son who looks at me like I'm just a bank account with legs? The sound of laughter drifted from the house behind me, but I had never felt more alone. This was supposed to be the happiest week of the year, surrounded by the people I loved most in the world. Instead, I felt like a stranger in my own family, valued only for what I could provide financially. I thought about all the sacrifices I had made over the years. All the times I had said yes when I should have said no. All the boundaries I had let them cross in the name of family harmony. And for what? So my son could look me in the eye and demand more money as if it were his birthright? The next morning, Jake appeared at my bedroom door before I had even finished getting dressed. He was holding his phone, showing me pictures of the car he wanted. A pristine white BMW SUV with leather seats and all the latest technology. Isn't it beautiful, Mom? This is exactly what I need to take my career to the next level. Sandra loves it too. It's perfect for our family. I looked at the images on his screen, each one showing a different angle of automotive perfection. The price tag at the bottom made my breath catch. $74,999, plus taxes and fees. Jake, this is almost as much as I spent on this entire vacation for all of us, I said, sitting heavily on the edge of the bed. He sat down next to me, and for a moment, I thought he might show some empathy, some understanding of what he was asking. Instead, he launched into a prepared speech about his career prospects and how this car would help him land bigger clients. But what about your current car? I asked. You bought it just 3 years ago. I remember because I co-signed the loan. Jake's jaw tightened. That car has problems, Mom. It's not reliable, and it doesn't project the right image. Look, I'm not asking you to buy me toys or pay for a vacation. This is an investment in my future, which means it's an investment in your grandchildren's future too. There it was. The subtle emotional blackmail that I had become so familiar with over the years. The implication that if I didn't support Jake financially, I was somehow failing as a mother and grandmother. I looked around my bedroom in the rented beach house. Everything was beautiful, expensive, paid for by me without question. The Egyptian cotton sheets, the ocean view, the fresh flowers that I had requested be placed in each room. I had wanted to create perfect memories for my family, but instead, I was creating a pattern of expectation and entitlement that was destroying us all. I need to think about it, I repeated, the same words I had said the day before. Jake's patience finally snapped. He stood up abruptly, his face flushed with anger. What is there to think about? You spend money on everyone else all the time. You bought Lisa that expensive camera equipment for her photography business. You paid for Michael's culinary school. You even gave Clara $5,000 for her college fund last year. But when I ask for help with something that could change my life, suddenly you need to think about it. His words stung because they contained enough truth to make me doubt myself. I had helped all my children financially over the years. I had always believed that sharing my good fortune was what family was supposed to do. But something about Jake's demand felt different. It felt less like a request for help and more like a demand for tribute. Those were different situations, I said quietly. Lisa paid me back for the camera equipment. Michael is using his culinary degree to build a career. And Clara's college fund was a gift for her future education. Oh, so now you're keeping score? Jake's voice was getting louder, and I worried that the rest of the family would overhear our conversation. I can't believe how selfish you're being, Mom. After everything I've done for you. That last sentence hit me like a slap across the face. Everything he had done for me? In my mind, I quickly inventoried our relationship over the past few years. The phone calls that only came when he needed money. The birthdays and holidays where he showed up empty-handed while I showered his family with gifts. The times I had been sick or lonely and heard nothing from him for weeks. What exactly have you done for me, Jake? The question came out before I could stop it, my voice barely above a whisper. His eyes flashed with something ugly, something that made me not recognize my own son. I put up with your neediness, for one thing. Do you know how exhausting it is to have a mother who's always trying to buy our love? Always planning these expensive trips and lavish gifts, then acting like we owe you something for it. The room started to spin. I gripped the edge of the mattress to keep from falling over. My own son, the child I had sacrificed everything for, was telling me that my love was a burden. That my generosity was manipulation. That my desire to spend time with my family was neediness. I never asked you to owe me anything, I managed to say through the tightness in my throat. I just wanted to make you happy. I wanted to take care of the people I love. Jake's expression softened slightly, but not with compassion. With the practiced ease of someone who knew exactly which buttons to push. I know you mean well, Mom. But if you really want to help me, if you really want to show that you believe in me, then you'll help me get this car. It's not about the money for you. It's about trust and support and believing in your son's future. There it was again. The masterful manipulation that turned my reasonable concerns into character flaws. That made saying no to his demands equivalent to not loving him enough. I had fallen for this pattern so many times before, always choosing to give in rather than risk his disappointment or anger. But this time, something inside me rebelled. Maybe it was the stark contrast between the paradise I had paid for and the ugliness of this conversation. Maybe it was the accumulation of years of one-sided generosity finally reaching a breaking point. Or maybe it was the ghost of my husband's voice, reminding me that love shouldn't hurt this much. I need to think about it, I said for the third time, but my voice was different now. Steadier. Less apologetic. Jake stared at me for a long moment, as if seeing me clearly for the first time in years. Then he shook his head in disgust and headed for the door. Fine. But don't expect me to wait around forever while you decide whether your own son's success is worth supporting. Sandra and I have already made plans around getting this car, and if you let me down, there will be consequences. The threat hung in the air long after he left the room. I sat there in the expensive beach house bedroom, surrounded by luxury that I had paid for, listening to the sound of my family enjoying a vacation that I had funded, and I had never felt more alone in my life. That afternoon, while everyone else was at the beach, I walked to a quiet cafe in South Beach. I needed space to think, away from the beautiful prison I had created for myself. The cafe was small and intimate, with mismatched chairs and local art on the walls. I ordered a cappuccino and sat by the window, watching tourists stroll past in their vacation clothes. I pulled out my phone and did something I hadn't done in months. I called my older sister Margaret, who lived in a retirement community in Florida. Ellie. What a lovely surprise. How's the family trip going? Just hearing her warm voice made tears spring to my eyes. Margaret was 4 years older than me, a retired teacher who had never married or had children. For years, I had pitted her for missing out on the joys of family life. Now I found myself envying her freedom. It's complicated, Maggie, I said, using her childhood nickname. I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. Of course, honey. What's wrong? I told her about Jake's demand for the car money. I told her about the pattern of financial requests that had been escalating over the years. I told her about the guilt and manipulation and the feeling that I was being used rather than loved. Margaret was quiet for a long time after I finished. Finally, she spoke, her teacher's voice gentle but firm. Eleanor, do you remember when you and Robert first got married, and you were worried about money? Yes, we were so young and broke. We could barely afford our tiny apartment in Brooklyn. And do you remember what you did when your mother offered to pay your rent for 6 months? I smiled despite my tears. We said no. We told her we appreciated the offer, but we needed to learn to stand on our own feet. That's right. You were proud and independent, and you understood that accepting too much help would make you dependent rather than strong. What happened to that woman, Ellie? The question hit me like a revelation. Somewhere along the way, in my desire to be generous and loving, I had forgotten the lessons of my own youth. I had confused enabling with supporting, buying with loving, giving with nurturing. I became a mother, I said quietly. And I wanted to give my children everything I didn't have. But look what it's created, Margaret said gently. Instead of raising independent, grateful adults, you've created dependencies and entitlement. And now you're the one who's suffering for it. That night at dinner, I watched my family around the table in the beach house dining room. The setting was perfect, candles flickering, the smell of grilled fish and tropical flowers in the air, the sound of gentle conversation mixed with the distant crash of waves. I had spent over $1,000 on this single meal, between the private chef and the premium wine and the elaborate dessert course. But as I looked around the table, I realized that no one was really seeing me. Jake was texting on his phone despite my repeated requests for device-free dinners. Sandra was discussing her plans to redecorate their kitchen, casually mentioning expensive fixtures and designer tiles as if money grew on trees. Lisa was complaining about her flight back to Los Angeles, suggesting that I should have booked first-class tickets for everyone. Michael's girlfriend was taking Instagram photos of her food, more interested in documenting the experience than living it. Only Clara, my 16-year-old granddaughter, seemed to notice my mood. She caught my eye across the table and gave me a small, concerned smile. After dinner, as the adults settled into the living room with their after-dinner drinks, Clara approached me on the balcony where I was standing alone. "Grandma Ellie, are you okay? You seem sad tonight." I looked down at this beautiful young woman who had inherited Robert's kind eyes and my stubborn chin. She was wearing a simple sundress that I had bought for her last birthday, but she wore it with a natural grace that reminded me of myself at her age. "I'm fine, sweetheart. Just tired." Clara studied my face with the intensity that only teenagers possess. "Is Dad giving you a hard time about something? I heard him talking to Mom about some car he wants." The fact that even Clara had picked up on the tension made my heart ache. This was supposed to be a joyful family vacation, but instead, I had brought everyone to paradise only to discover that paradise couldn't buy happiness or love. "Adults have complicated relationships sometimes," I said carefully, not wanting to burden her with my problems. "Grandma, can I tell you something? And promise you won't get mad?" I nodded, curious about what she might say. "Sometimes I think Dad takes advantage of how generous you are. Like, he always knows you'll say yes to whatever he asks for, so he keeps asking for bigger and bigger things. It's not fair to you." Out of the mouths of babes. This 16-year-old girl had seen what I had been trying to avoid acknowledging for years. My own generosity had created a monster, and that monster was my own son. "What do you think I should do?" I asked her, genuinely curious about her perspective. Clara shrugged with the wisdom that sometimes comes with youth. "Maybe try saying no once in a while. See what happens. If someone only loves you when you're giving them things, then they don't really love you at all, right?" That night, I lay awake in my luxurious bedroom, listening to the sound of the ocean and thinking about Clara's words. The moonlight streamed through the sheer curtains, casting ethereal shadows on the walls. Everything around me was beautiful and expensive and temporary. Just like the relationships I had been trying to buy. I thought about Robert, about what he would say if he could see me now. He had always been the practical one in our marriage, the one who insisted on teaching our children the value of work and independence. Had I dishonored his memory by turning our children into dependent adults who saw me as a personal ATM rather than their mother? The next morning was our last day in Miami. Jake approached me right after breakfast, his impatience barely contained. "So, Mom, have you made your decision about the car?" I looked at my son, really looked at him. He was a handsome man, successful in his career, blessed with a beautiful family and every advantage that money and love could provide. But there was something missing in his eyes, something that I was just beginning to recognize as basic human empathy. "Jake, I've decided that I can't give you the money for the car." The words came out calmly, quietly, but they might as well have been shouted from the rooftops based on his reaction. His face went through a series of expressions: surprise, disbelief, anger, and finally, cold fury. "Are you serious right now? After everything I told you about how important this is for my career?" "I'm very serious. I love you, but I can't continue to fund every want and desire you have. You have a good job, a nice home, a reliable car. You can save up for the BMW if it's really important to you." Jake's hands clenched into fists at his sides. "I can't believe you're doing this to me. Do you know what Sandra is going to say when I tell her that my own mother won't help me when I need it?" "This isn't about Sandra. This is about you learning to live within your means and appreciate what you already have." "What I already have?" Jake's voice was rising, and I could see other family members starting to look in our direction from across the living room. "What I already have is embarrassing. What I already have isn't good enough for where I want to be in life. And what I already have is a mother who apparently doesn't care about my success." The emotional manipulation was so blatant now, so practiced and cruel, that I almost laughed. Almost. Instead, I felt something inside me harden, like molten metal cooling into steel. "I do care about your success," I said quietly. "That's exactly why I'm saying no. Real success comes from working for what you want, not from having it handed to you by your mother." Jake stared at me as if I had grown a second head. Then he turned and walked away without another word. But I could hear him in the kitchen, speaking in urgent whispers to Sandra. Within an hour, their entire family had packed their bags and announced they were catching an earlier flight home. The goodbye was Arctic cold. Jake barely looked at me as he gathered his son's scattered toys from around the living room. Sandra gave me a perfunctory hug that felt like embracing a mannequin. "I hope you're happy," Sandra said quietly as they prepared to leave for the airport. "You've ruined Christmas for his children." But it was Jake's parting shot that really cut deep. As he stood in the doorway with his luggage, he turned back to me with eyes that held nothing but contempt. "You know what, Mom? Don't bother calling for a while. I need time to process the fact that my own mother values money more than her son's happiness." And then they were gone, leaving me standing in the beautiful beach house with Lisa, Michael, and Clara. The silence was deafening. Lisa tried to smooth things over with her usual diplomatic approach. "Mom, maybe you should reconsider." Jake really did seem stressed about this car situation. But Michael, to my surprise, shook his head firmly. "No, Mom was right. Jake needs to learn that he can't just demand money whenever he wants something. I've watched him do this for years, and it's not healthy for any of us." Clara came over and took my hand. "I'm proud of you, Grandma." That took courage. That afternoon, after Lisa and Clara left for their flight back to Los Angeles, Michael and I took a long walk on the beach. The sand was warm beneath our feet, and the late afternoon sun painted everything in shades of gold and orange. It should have been peaceful, but my heart felt like it was breaking. "Did I do the right thing?" I asked Michael as we walked along the water's edge. Michael was quiet for a moment, picking up a smooth piece of sea glass and turning it over in his palm. Finally, he spoke. "Mom, can I ask you something? When was the last time Jake called you just to see how you were doing? Not because he needed money or wanted something, but just because he missed you." I opened my mouth to answer, then closed it again. I couldn't remember. Every phone call from Jake in recent years had been preceded by some kind of crisis or request. Birthday calls, holiday calls, even Mother's Day calls somehow always included mentions of financial stress or hints about things he needed. "That's what I thought," Michael said gently. "Mom, I know you love us all, and I know you want to take care of us. But there's a difference between helping someone in a genuine emergency and being someone's personal bank account." We walked in comfortable silence for a while, watching seabirds dive for fish in the surf and listening to the rhythmic sound of waves. Finally, Michael spoke again. "I need to tell you something that I probably should have said years ago. Jake's marriage to Sandra has been struggling financially because they live way beyond their means. They have credit card debt, they've refinanced their house twice, and they spend money like they're millionaires when they're not even close. Every time you bail them out, you're enabling them to continue making bad decisions." This was news to me. I had always assumed that Jake's financial requests were for legitimate emergencies or investments in his future. The idea that I was actually helping him maintain an unsustainable lifestyle made me feel sick to my stomach. "Why didn't you tell me this before?" I asked. Michael shrugged. "Because I didn't want to get in the middle of it. And honestly, because I knew you would just give him the money anyway. You always do." That night, alone in the beach house, I sat on the balcony with a glass of wine and watched the moon rise over the Atlantic Ocean. The house felt enormous and empty without my entire family there. But for the first time in years, the emptiness didn't feel lonely. It felt peaceful. I thought about the conversation with Michael, about Clara's wisdom, about Margaret's gentle challenge to remember who I used to be. I thought about Robert and what he would think of the woman I had become versus the woman he had married. That young woman had been strong and independent, confident in her own worth, unwilling to let anyone take advantage of her kindness. When had I lost that woman? When had I started equating love with money, relationships with transactions? I pulled out my phone and looked at the banking app that showed my accounts. The numbers were still substantial, my investments in stocks and cryptocurrency had performed well, my pension was stable, and my social security provided a comfortable lifestyle. But for the first time in years, I wasn't looking at those numbers as a resource for other people's wants and needs. I was looking at them as my security, my freedom, my ticket to the life I wanted to live. The flight back to New York was quiet and contemplative. As the plane descended toward LaGuardia Airport, I looked out the window at the city sprawling beneath me. Manhattan's skyscrapers glittered in the afternoon sun, and I could see the familiar grid of streets that had been my home for most of my adult life. But somehow, everything looked different, cleaner, more full of possibility. Back in my small apartment in Queens, I unpacked my suitcase and surveyed my familiar surroundings. The same worn furniture that I had been meaning to replace for years. The same faded photographs on the walls showing happier times with Robert and the children. The same sense of small, cramped spaces after the luxury of the beach house. But instead of feeling depressed by the contrast, I felt something unexpected. Relief. This was my space, my sanctuary, paid for by my money without anyone else's input or expectations. For the first time in years, I was home without immediately planning the next family gathering or thinking about which child might need financial help next. The refrigerator hummed quietly in the kitchen, and outside my window, I could hear the familiar sounds of the city, car horns and sirens, the subway rumbling past, the chatter of pedestrians on the sidewalk below. These sounds, which had sometimes felt isolating in the past, now felt like a symphony of independence. I made myself a simple dinner, scrambled eggs and toast, nothing fancy, and ate it while watching the evening news. No elaborate meal planning for multiple people with different dietary preferences. No expensive wine chosen to impress anyone. Just me, enjoying a quiet meal in my own space. After dinner, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my financial advisor, David Martinez, a sharp young man who had been managing my investments since Robert's death. "Mrs. Thompson, how was your Christmas vacation? Did the family enjoy Miami?" "It was educational," I said carefully. "David, I need to make some changes to my accounts. I want to set up some new protections and restrictions." We spent an hour discussing my finances. I learned that my portfolio was worth significantly more than I had realized, nearly $2 million in stocks, bonds, and cryptocurrency investments. The Bitcoin that Robert and I had bought as an experiment years ago had grown exponentially in value. I had enough money to live comfortably for the rest of my life, travel whenever I wanted, and still leave a substantial inheritance to my children and grandchildren. But I also learned that in the past 3 years alone, I had given away nearly $300,000 to my adult children. $300,000 that could have funded a very comfortable retirement lifestyle, or travel adventures, or a dozen other dreams I had put aside in favor of being everyone else's financial fairy godmother. "Mrs. Thompson," David said carefully, "I hope you don't mind me saying this, but from a financial planning perspective, the amount you've been dispersing to family members isn't sustainable long term. If you continue at this rate, you'll significantly impact your own retirement security." After I hung up with David, I sat in my living room thinking about numbers and relationships and the intersection between the two. $300,000. Enough to buy a lovely condo in a warmer climate. Enough to travel the world. Enough to ensure my own comfort and security for decades to come. Instead, it had gone to bailing Jake out of credit card debt, funding Sandra's kitchen renovation, paying for Lisa's photography equipment, covering Michael's culinary school tuition, and dozens of other family wants and needs. Not that helping my children was wrong. But somewhere along the way, helping had become expecting, and expecting had become demanding, and demanding had become taking me for granted. My phone buzzed with a text message. For a moment, I hoped it might be Jake, calling to apologize for his behavior in Miami. Instead, it was Sandra. "Hi Eleanor. Jake is very hurt by your decision about the car. He's been depressed since we got home and can barely focus on work. I hope you'll reconsider and transfer the money soon. He's already told his colleagues about the new BMW and it would be embarrassing for him to show up in his old car again. We can work out a payment plan if that makes you feel better about it." I read the message 3 times, each time feeling a different emotion. First, guilt, the familiar, crushing guilt that always accompanied family conflict. Then, anger, at the manipulation, at the assumption that my money was their money, at the complete lack of concern for my feelings in the situation. Finally, clarity, a clear, clean understanding that this pattern would never end unless I ended it. I typed back a simple response: "I've made my decision." The answer is no. Sandra's reply came within minutes: "I hope you can live with yourself knowing that you've damaged your relationship with your son over money." I turned off my phone after that. The irony was so thick I could taste it. I was the one being accused of caring more about money than family, when I was the only person in this entire situation who wasn't trying to use money to manipulate anyone else. That night, I had the first good night's sleep I'd had in months. I woke up the next morning to silence, no family obligations, no financial crisis calls, no one needing anything from me. Just the gentle sound of morning traffic and the aroma of coffee brewing in my kitchen. I spent the day doing small things for myself. I walked to the library and browsed through travel books, imagining trips to places I had always wanted to visit. I stopped by a small art supply store and bought a beginner's watercolor set, something I had been interested in trying for years but never seemed to have time for. I treated myself to lunch at a tiny Middle Eastern restaurant in my neighborhood, savoring flavors and taking time to actually taste my food instead of rushing through meals while planning someone else's life. It was a quiet, unremarkable day, but it felt like a revolution. The next week brought a series of phone calls that revealed the true scope of the family crisis my decision had created. Lisa called first, her voice carefully neutral in that diplomatic way she had perfected over the years. "Mom, I think you should know that Jake is really upset. He's talking about not coming to Easter dinner, and Sandra is suggesting that maybe it's time for everyone to step back from family gatherings for a while." The threat was implicit but clear: give Jake the money, or lose access to your family. It was emotional blackmail in its purest form, delivered through my daughter who probably didn't even realize she was being used as a messenger. Lisa, I love all of you, but I can't continue to fund Jake's lifestyle choices. If he chooses to remove himself from family gatherings because I won't buy him a car, that's his decision to make. Lisa was quiet for a moment. Mom, don't you think you're being a little harsh? It's just money, and you have plenty of it. There it was again. The assumption that because I had money, everyone else was entitled to it. As if the decades Robert and I had spent building our wealth through careful planning and smart investments meant nothing. As if my financial security was some kind of community resource instead of the foundation of my independence. It's not about the money, Lisa. It's about the principle. Jake is a grown man with a good job and a family to support. He needs to learn to live within his means. But Mom, what if this really could help his career? What if saying no costs him opportunities? I took a deep breath, feeling the weight of years of similar conversations pressing down on me. Then he'll learn to create his own opportunities, just like every other adult in the world. 2 days later, Michael called with a different perspective. Mom, I need to tell you something. Jake called me yesterday, asking if I thought you might change your mind about the car money. But then he said something that really bothered me. What did he say? He said that if you were going to be selfish with your money, maybe it was time to start thinking about what would happen to your assets when you passed away. He suggested that he and Sandra should probably talk to a lawyer about protecting their future inheritance. The words hit me like ice water. My own son was already planning for my death, viewing my eventual passing as a financial opportunity rather than a loss of his mother. The depth of his callousness took my breath away. Michael, are you sure that's what he said? I'm positive, Mom. And honestly, it made me sick to my stomach. I told him that talking about your inheritance while you're alive and healthy was completely inappropriate. But he just said he was being practical. After I hung up with Michael, I sat in my kitchen for a long time, staring at the photos on my refrigerator. Pictures of Jake's wedding, where I had paid for half the reception because they couldn't afford the venue Sandra wanted. Photos of his children's birthday parties, where I was always the one bringing the expensive gifts while other relatives brought homemade cards and small presents. Images of Christmas mornings where the pile of gifts I had bought dwarfed everyone else's contributions. I had created this monster. Through years of generosity and boundary crossing and conflating money with love, I had taught my own son to see me as a resource rather than a person. And now he was already planning for the day when that resource would be fully available to him. That afternoon, I did something I had never done before. I made an appointment with an estate planning attorney. If Jake was already thinking about inheritance and lawyers, then it was time for me to think about those things too. The law office was in a high-rise building in Midtown Manhattan, all glass and chrome and expensive furniture. The attorney, Patricia Williams, was a woman about my age with silver hair and kind eyes behind designer glasses. She listened patiently as I explained my family situation and my concerns about my estate planning. Mrs. Thompson, what you're describing is unfortunately quite common. Adult children who have become accustomed to regular financial support from their parents often view eventual inheritance as a continuation of that support. But inheritance planning shouldn't be about rewarding or punishing behavior, it should be about reflecting your values and wishes. We spent 2 hours discussing options. Trust funds that would provide for my grandchildren's education but couldn't be accessed for luxury purchases. Charitable giving that would honor Robert's memory while reducing the total amount available to children who might not appreciate it. Protective measures that would prevent any of my children from contesting my will or making claims about my mental capacity if they disagreed with my decisions. Mrs. Thompson, I have to ask, are you making these changes in response to a temporary family conflict, or do they reflect your long-term wishes? I thought about the question carefully. 6 months ago, I would have said this was temporary. But I'm beginning to understand that this conflict is just the latest symptom of a much bigger problem. My son doesn't view me as his mother. He views me as his financial backup plan. And that's not something that's likely to change just because I give him money for a car. Walking out of that law office, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years, a sense of control over my own life. For so long, I had been reactive, responding to other people's needs and demands and crises. Now, for the first time, I was being proactive, making decisions based on my own values and priorities. The city bustled around me as I walked toward the subway station. New York in January was cold and gray, but somehow everything looked brighter. The street vendors were setting up their lunch carts, filling the air with the smell of roasted nuts and hot coffee. Construction workers were taking their break, sitting on concrete barriers and sharing jokes. Office workers hurried past in their expensive coats and designer shoes, talking into their phones about meetings and deadlines and weekend plans. All of these people were living their own lives, pursuing their own dreams, solving their own problems without expecting someone else to fund their choices. When had I taught my children that they were different, that they were exempt from the basic adult responsibility of paying their own way? That evening, I called Clara. Of all my family members, she was the only one who had shown any understanding of my position during the Miami trip. "Hi, Grandma Ellie. How are you doing? Dad said you guys had some kind of fight about a car?" "Something like that. Clara, can I ask you something? From your perspective as a young person, do you think it's normal for adult children to expect their parents to pay for expensive things like new cars?" Clara was quiet for a moment, and I could almost hear her thinking. "Honestly? Most of my friends' parents help them out sometimes, but not like that. Like, my friend Madison's parents helped her buy her first used car when she turned 16, but it was like a $3,000 Honda, not some fancy BMW. And she had to get a part-time job to pay for gas and insurance. What about your friends who are in college? Do their parents pay for everything?" "Some do, but even then, there are usually limits. My friend Alex gets money for tuition and dorm fees, but he has to work in the campus bookstore to pay for his own food and entertainment. And my friend Sarah's parents told her they'd help with college costs, but if she wants to study abroad or do expensive spring break trips, she has to find a way to pay for those herself." Listening to Clara talk about her peers and their families, I realized how far outside normal boundaries my relationship with Jake had drifted. Helping with legitimate needs was one thing. Funding luxury purchases for a grown man with his own income was something else entirely. "Grandma, can I tell you something? And promise you won't tell Dad I said this?" "Of course, sweetheart. I think Dad has gotten spoiled by how generous you are. Like, he talks about money stuff at family dinners all the time, complaining about bills or talking about things he wants to buy, and it's like he just expects someone else to solve his problems for him. It's kind of embarrassing, honestly." The fact that Jake's financial immaturity was evident even to his teenage niece was both heartbreaking and illuminating. If a 16-year-old could see the problems with his behavior, how had I been blind to it for so long? The next few weeks were the longest period I had gone without contact with Jake since he was born. No phone calls, no text messages, no unexpected visits. At first, the silence felt ominous, like the calm before a storm. But gradually, it began to feel peaceful. Liberating, even. I settled into a routine that revolved around my own interests and needs for the first time in decades. Morning coffee while reading the newspaper without interruption. Afternoon walks through Flushing Meadows Park, where I could watch the seasons change and enjoy the solitude. Evening painting sessions with my new watercolors, creating simple landscapes and still lives that no one would judge or critique. I also began to notice how much money I was saving by not funding Jake's lifestyle. Without constant requests for emergency loans and expensive gifts, my monthly expenses dropped significantly. I started looking at vacation packages and art classes and small luxuries that I had been denying myself for years in favor of being available for family financial crises. But the peace was broken 6 weeks after Miami when Sandra showed up at my apartment unannounced on a Wednesday afternoon. I heard the buzzer and assumed it was a package delivery. Instead, Sandra's voice came through the intercom, tense and demanding. "Eleanor, I need to talk to you. It's about Jake." I buzzed her up reluctantly, wondering what fresh crisis or manipulation this visit would bring. Sandra knocked on my door 3 minutes later, looking perfectly put together in an expensive wool coat and designer handbag. But her eyes were hard, and her smile was sharp enough to cut glass. "Thank you for seeing me," she said, stepping into my small living room without invitation. "I think it's time we had an honest conversation about this situation." I offered her coffee, which she declined. We sat across from each other in my living room, the tension thick enough to choke on. Sandra looked around my modest apartment with barely concealed disdain, her eyes lingering on my secondhand furniture and discount store decorations. "Eleanor, I want you to understand what your decision about the car has cost us. Jake has been depressed for weeks. He's barely eating, he can't focus at work, and he's starting to resent you in ways that might be permanent." The emotional manipulation was so blatant that I almost laughed. "Sandra, Jake is a grown man. If he's having an emotional breakdown because his mother won't buy him a luxury car, then maybe he needs professional help, not more money." Sandra's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing something ugly underneath. "Do you know what people are saying about you? Jake's colleagues, our friends, our neighbors? They all know that you're wealthy, and they all know that you refused to help your own son when he asked for support. It's humiliating for our entire family." "What exactly are people saying?" "They're saying that you're selfish. That you care more about hoarding money than supporting your children's success. That you're bitter and controlling and using your wealth to manipulate your family." Each accusation stung, not because I believed them, but because I realized that Jake and Sandra had been actively spreading this narrative to anyone who would listen. They were trying to embarrass me into compliance, to make saying no so socially costly that I would give in rather than face public judgment. Sandra, if Jake is telling people that his mother is selfish because she won't buy him a $75,000 car, then the problem isn't with me. The problem is with his sense of entitlement. Sandra leaned forward, her voice dropping to a hiss. Let me be very clear about something, Eleanor. If you continue to refuse to help Jake, there will be consequences. He's already talking about cutting contact with you entirely. That means no more family dinners, no more holiday visits, no more access to your grandchildren. Is your pride really worth losing your family over? The threat hung in the air between us like poison gas. This was the nuclear option, the ultimate manipulation that Sandra had been saving for this moment. Either I gave them the money they demanded, or I lost access to the people I loved most in the world. For a moment, the old Eleanor almost surfaced. The Eleanor who would do anything to avoid conflict, who would pay any price to maintain family harmony, who confused love with financial support and feared loneliness more than exploitation. But then I thought about Clara's wisdom, about Michael's support, about the peace I had found in the past 6 weeks of living for myself. I thought about Robert and what he would say about a daughter-in-law who would use grandchildren as weapons in a financial dispute. Sandra, I said quietly, if Jake wants to remove himself and his children from my life because I won't fund his luxury purchases, that's his choice to make. But I won't be blackmailed into giving money I don't owe for a car he doesn't need. Sandra stared at me as if I had grown a second head. This was not the response she had expected. This was not the compliant, guilt-ridden mother-in-law who had always given in to emotional pressure in the past. You're making a huge mistake, she said, standing up and gathering her purse with sharp, angry movements. Jake is your son. Those are your grandchildren. If you lose them over something as stupid as money, you'll regret it for the rest of your life. After Sandra left, I sat in my apartment for a long time, processing what had just happened. The threats, the manipulation, the complete absence of any acknowledgement that I might be a human being with feelings and rights rather than just an unwilling ATM. But something else occurred to me as I replayed the conversation. Sandra had revealed more than she intended. Her threats were based on the assumption that I needed them more than they needed me. That I was so desperate for family connection that I would pay any price to maintain it. That I valued being a grandmother more than being treated with basic human respect. What if she was wrong? What if this standoff revealed who really valued family relationships and who just valued family money? I decided to test that theory. That night, I sent a group text to all my adult children. I wanted everyone to know that I love you all very much, and you will always be welcome in my home and my life. However, I will no longer be providing financial support beyond genuine emergencies. I'm happy to discuss this decision individually with anyone who's interested. The responses came quickly and revealed everything I needed to know about each of my children's priorities. Lisa called within an hour, her voice careful but concerned. Mom, are you okay? This seems like a big change for you. I'm fine, sweetheart. I've just realized that I've been confusing financial support with emotional support for too many years. I have to admit, this might actually be good for all of us. I felt guilty sometimes about how much help you give me compared to Jake and Michael. Maybe if we all learned to stand on our own feet more, we'd appreciate each other for the right reasons. Michael's response was even more supportive. Mom, I think this is great. I've been worried about how much money you've been giving away. You should be spending that money on yourself, on travel and hobbies and things that make you happy. Jake's response came the next morning, in the form of a voicemail that I played 3 times to make sure I understood it correctly. Mom, I can't believe you sent that text message to the whole family, like you're some kind of victim in this situation. Sandra told me about your conversation yesterday, and I want you to know that I'm done. I'm done asking you for help, I'm done including you in our lives, and I'm done pretending that you care about anyone besides yourself. Don't call me, don't visit, and don't expect to see your grandchildren again until you're willing to apologize and make things right. The brutality of the message took my breath away. But underneath the shock and hurt, I felt something unexpected, relief. The manipulation was finally out in the open. The financial transactionalism of our relationship was finally acknowledged. And I finally understood that I hadn't failed as a mother, I had succeeded in raising a son who revealed his true character when he couldn't get what he wanted from me. That weekend, Clara called me, her voice tight with anxiety. Grandma Ellie, I don't understand what's happening with Dad. He's furious all the time, and he keeps talking about how you've betrayed the family. Mom and I are trying to stay out of it, but it's really uncomfortable. I'm sorry you're caught in the middle of this, sweetheart. How are you and your mother handling everything? Mom thinks Dad is being too harsh. She said that even if you don't want to help with the car, that's no reason to cut you out of our lives entirely. She's planning to visit you next month when she comes to New York for work. The fact that Lisa was planning to maintain our relationship despite Jake's ultimatum gave me hope. Maybe this crisis would actually strengthen the relationships that were based on genuine love while clearly identifying the ones that were based on financial convenience. A month later, Lisa did visit, and we spent a wonderful weekend together. We went to museums in Manhattan, walked through Central Park, and had long conversations about art and books and travel. For the first time in years, we talked about topics other than money and family obligations and who needed what kind of help. "Mom," Lisa said as we shared dessert at a small cafe in Greenwich Village, "I have to tell you something. This whole situation with Jake has made me realize how much our family conversations have revolved around money over the past few years. Jake asking for help, you worrying about everyone's financial situations, all of us discussing who needed what and when. I didn't realize how exhausting that must have been for you." "It was exhausting," I admitted. "But I thought that was what being a good mother meant. Taking care of everyone, solving everyone's problems. But there's a difference between taking care of your children and enabling them to avoid taking care of themselves. I think Jake crossed that line a long time ago, and maybe the rest of us did too." That night, after Lisa left for her hotel, I sat in my apartment thinking about the difference between helping and enabling, between supporting and rescuing, between loving someone and funding their lifestyle. I had spent so many years afraid of being seen as selfish or uncaring that I had swung too far in the opposite direction, becoming a financial solution for every problem instead of a mother who taught independence and resilience. But the real revelation came a few weeks later, when I bumped into Jake and Sandra at the grocery store in our neighborhood. I was in the produce section, carefully selecting vegetables for the week, when I heard familiar voices in the next aisle. They didn't see me, but I could hear every word of their conversation. "The BMW dealer called again," Sandra was saying. "They're offering us an extended financing option that would bring the monthly payments down to something we might be able to manage." "How much?" Jake asked. "About $1,200 a month, but we'd have to put down $20,000, and we'd be paying for 7 years instead of 5. That's ridiculous. Why should we pay interest when my mother is sitting on millions of dollars she's not even using? Maybe you should try calling her again. Apologize for the harsh words and explain that you've found a compromise solution." "No way. She's the one who needs to apologize. She's the one who turned her back on her own family over money." I stood there among the apples and oranges, listening to my son and daughter-in-law plan their strategy for manipulating me back into compliance. The conversation revealed so much about their mindset. They still saw my money as their money, they still viewed my refusal as unreasonable selfishness, and they were actively strategizing ways to overcome my resistance rather than accepting my decision. But it also revealed something else. They were genuinely struggling financially, not because of any emergency or legitimate crisis, but because they had built a lifestyle based on expectations of ongoing financial support from me. Without that support, they couldn't afford the life they had been living. In that moment, I realized that my decision to cut off family funding wasn't just about teaching Jake responsibility, it was about revealing the true extent to which my money had been holding up an elaborate house of cards. Sandra's expensive clothes, their frequent restaurant meals, their luxury vacations, even their mortgage payments had all been subsidized by my generosity. Without that subsidy, their actual financial capacity was far more modest than their lifestyle suggested. I finished my grocery shopping and drove home, thinking about sustainability and authenticity and the difference between the life someone can afford and the life someone wants to live. Jake and Sandra had been living a lie, funded by my money, and now they were angry at me for forcing them to face reality. That night, I did something I hadn't done in months. I called my financial advisor David and asked him to show me projections of what my retirement could look like if I stopped all family financial support and started spending money on myself. The numbers were eye-opening. Within 5 years, I could afford to buy a small vacation home somewhere warm. I could travel to Europe, take art classes in Italy, visit the grandchildren Lisa might have someday in Los Angeles. I could hire house cleaning services, eat at nice restaurants whenever I wanted, and generally live the kind of comfortable lifestyle that my years of careful investing and saving had earned. "Mrs. Thompson," David said, "with your current assets and income streams, you could live very well without touching your principal at all. The returns on your investments alone would fund a lifestyle that most retirees would envy. What about leaving an inheritance to my children? Even if you spent significantly more on yourself, there would still be a substantial estate to pass on. But the question you need to ask yourself is whether your children have earned that inheritance through their current behavior and attitudes." After I hung up with David, I made myself a cup of tea and sat in my living room, looking at the financial projections he had emailed me. For the first time in years, I wasn't looking at my money as a resource for other people's needs. I was looking at it as the foundation for my own dreams and security. The next morning, I did something that would have been unthinkable 6 months earlier. I called a travel agent and booked a 2-week trip to Italy. Rome, Florence, Tuscany, all the places I had dreamed of visiting but never prioritized because there was always some family financial crisis that seemed more important. The trip was scheduled for April, and as the departure date approached, I felt something I hadn't experienced in decades: excitement about my own future. I bought new clothes, researched museums and restaurants, and enrolled in an online Italian language course. 2 weeks before my departure, Jake called. It was the first time I had heard from him directly since his angry voicemail months earlier. His voice was strained, and I could hear desperation underneath his attempt at casual conversation. "Hi, Mom. How are you doing?" "I'm doing very well, thank you. How are Sandra and the boys?" "We're okay. Listen, Mom, I've been thinking a lot about our situation, and I wondered if we could maybe meet for coffee and talk things through." I almost smiled at the transparent attempt at reconciliation. "What did you want to talk about?" "Just, family stuff. I miss you, and the boys ask about Grandma sometimes. I thought maybe we could find a way to move past this whole car thing and get back to normal." "What does back to normal look like to you, Jake?" There was a long pause. "Well, I thought maybe we could agree to put the car situation behind us and just focus on being a family again." "And what about future requests for money?" Another pause, longer this time. "I mean, families help each other out sometimes. That's normal. But maybe we could talk about those situations case by case." I understood exactly what he was proposing. He wanted to go back to the old dynamic where I was available as a financial resource whenever he decided he needed one, but he wanted to frame it as normal family support rather than the pattern of exploitation it had become. "Jake, I love you, and you're always welcome in my life. But I won't be providing any more financial support beyond genuine emergencies. If you can accept that boundary, then I'd be happy to rebuild our relationship. But Mom, what if something comes up? What if we really need help with something important? Then you'll handle it the way other adults handle financial challenges, through your own resources, bank loans, or genuine emergencies that families typically rally around." Jake was quiet for so long that I thought the call had dropped. Finally, he spoke, and his voice was cold again. "So you're saying that your own son isn't worth helping when he needs it?" "I'm saying that my own son is capable of handling his own financial responsibilities without expecting his retired mother to fund his lifestyle choices." He hung up without saying goodbye. 2 days later, Sandra called. Her approach was different, softer, more emotional, designed to appeal to my grandmother instincts rather than my parental obligations. "Eleanor, I'm calling because Jake's pride won't let him say what needs to be said. He misses you terribly, and so do the boys. Tommy asked me last week why Ellie doesn't come to his baseball games anymore." The manipulation was expertly crafted, using my grandson as emotional leverage. But I had learned to recognize these tactics now, and they no longer had the power to override my judgment. "Sandra, I miss them too. Jake is welcome to call me anytime to arrange visits that don't involve requests for money. But Eleanor, you have to understand, Jake is a proud man. He's not going to come crawling back just to have a relationship with you. If you want to see your grandchildren, you're going to have to meet him halfway." "What does halfway mean?" "Maybe not the full amount for the BMW, but something to show that you're willing to invest in his success. Maybe $20,000 or $30,000 to help him get a reliable used car." There it was. The negotiation that revealed this entire reconciliation attempt was just another strategy for accessing my money. The only difference was that they had lowered their asking price and reframed the request as a compromise. "Sandra, the answer is still no. The amount doesn't matter, the principle does. You're going to lose your family over this stubbornness, you know that, right? Jake is already talking about moving to Florida where Sandra's parents live. If that happens, you'll never see Tommy and Jake Jr. again. That would be very sad, but it would be Jake's choice to make." After Sandra hung up, I sat in my apartment feeling a mix of sadness and relief. Sadness that my relationship with Jake had deteriorated to the point where every interaction was about money rather than love. But relief that I had finally found the strength to maintain my boundaries despite emotional blackmail and threats. The next week, I flew to Italy. The trip was everything I had dreamed it would be and more. I wandered through the ruins of ancient Rome, stood in awe before Michelangelo's David in Florence, and spent lazy afternoons painting watercolors in Tuscan hill towns. I ate incredible food, drank wonderful wine, and had conversations with fellow travelers from around the world. But the most transformative moment came in a small cafe in Siena, where I was having lunch alone while sketching the medieval architecture across the piazza. An elderly Italian woman at the next table struck up a conversation, asking about my artwork in heavily accented English. "You are traveling alone?" she asked with curiosity rather than pity. "Yes, it's my first solo trip in many years." "Ah, brava. This is the best way to travel when you are older. No one else's schedule, no one else's interests, just your own pleasure and discovery." We talked for over an hour about travel and art and the freedom that comes with age. She had been widowed for 8 years and had spent that time visiting every country she had ever wanted to see. "When I was young," she said, "I lived for everyone else. Husband, children, grandchildren. Always cooking, cleaning, worrying, organizing everything for them. Then my husband died, and my children were grown with their own lives, and I realized, what about me? When do I get to live for myself? Her words resonated so deeply that I felt tears spring to my eyes. This woman, from a completely different culture and background, had articulated exactly what I had been feeling but hadn't been able to express. It took courage, she continued, to start living for myself after so many years of living for others. My children thought I was being selfish when I started traveling instead of babysitting grandchildren every weekend. But selfish is good sometimes, no? Selfish means knowing your own worth. That night, in my hotel room overlooking the Tuscan countryside, I wrote in a journal I had bought in Rome. I wrote about the past year, Jake's demand, my refusal, the family crisis that had followed. But I also wrote about the peace I had found, the dreams I was finally pursuing, the woman I was rediscovering after decades of defining myself only through my relationships with others. I realized that what Jake and Sandra saw as selfishness, I now understood as self-preservation. What they viewed as abandonment was actually self-discovery. What they interpreted as lack of love was actually the first act of genuine self-love I had shown myself in years. When I returned to New York, I felt like a different person. My apartment, which had seemed small and cramped before my trip, now felt cozy and manageable. The city sounds that had sometimes felt overwhelming now seemed vibrant and alive. I looked at my modest possessions with new appreciation rather than comparing them to the luxury I had funded for others. I also returned to a voicemail from Clara. Hi, Grandma Ellie. I heard about your trip to Italy from Aunt Lisa. I can't wait to hear all about it. Also, I wanted you to know that I'll be in New York next month for a school trip, and I was wondering if I could stay with you for one night instead of the hotel with my class. If that's okay with you, that is. Hearing Clara's voice filled me with joy. This relationship, with my granddaughter who valued me for who I was rather than what I could provide, reminded me why boundaries were so important. By refusing to let Jake exploit me financially, I had preserved my ability to be genuinely generous with the people who truly appreciated it. Clara's visit was wonderful. She was fascinated by my photos from Italy and listened with genuine interest as I described the art and architecture and food I had experienced. We cooked dinner together in my small kitchen, and she helped me set up a makeshift studio in my living room where I could continue painting. Grandma, you seem different, she observed as we worked side by side on watercolor landscapes. Happier, maybe? I think I am happier, I admitted. I've been learning to take care of myself instead of always taking care of everyone else. That's probably healthy. My psychology teacher says that people who don't set boundaries with their families often end up feeling resentful and exhausted. Your psychology teacher is very wise. Clara was quiet for a moment, focusing on mixing colors on her palette. Then she spoke carefully, as if she had been thinking about this conversation for a while. Grandma, I want you to know that I don't blame you for saying no to Dad about the car. I love him, but I think he's been taking advantage of how generous you are for a long time. What makes you say that? Well, he's always talking about money problems and things he needs, but then he and Sandra go out to expensive restaurants and buy designer clothes and take vacations. If they really had money problems, wouldn't they cut back on that stuff before asking you for help? Once again, Clara's teenage perspective was clearer and more honest than the adults in our family had been able to manage. She saw what I had been refusing to acknowledge, that Jake's financial requests weren't about genuine need but about maintaining a lifestyle he couldn't actually afford. Also, Clara continued, I've noticed that he only calls you when he needs something. On your birthday last year, he didn't even call until Sandra reminded him 3 days later. But whenever he has a financial crisis, you're the first person he contacts. The observation stung because it was so accurate. Jake's pattern of communication with me had become entirely transactional, crisis calls, request calls, and obligation calls, but never just because I love you calls. Clara, can I ask you something? Do you think I was wrong to say no to him? She considered the question seriously, her youthful face scrunched up in concentration. I think you were brave to say no. Most grandparents I know would have just given in to avoid the drama. But I also think Dad needs to learn that other people aren't responsible for solving his problems. That night, after Clara left for her hotel, I reflected on how much clarity this crisis had brought to my family relationships. Clara, who had no financial expectations of me, was interested in my thoughts and experiences and well-being. Lisa, who had always been more independent financially, was supportive of my boundaries and actually seemed relieved that I was focusing on my own needs for once. Michael, who had worked hard to establish his own career, understood why Jake's constant demands were problematic. Only Jake, who had become accustomed to treating me as a personal bank, was outraged by my decision to prioritize my own financial security and emotional well-being. The pattern was clear now in a way that it hadn't been before. The family members who genuinely loved me were comfortable with my boundaries, while the one who primarily valued me for my money was the only one who couldn't accept those boundaries. 5 months after returning from Italy, I received an unexpected visit from Michael. He arrived at my apartment on a Saturday evening, looking serious and slightly nervous. "Mom, I need to tell you something, and I'm not sure how you're going to react to it." My heart skipped a beat. After the year I'd had, unexpected serious conversations with my children made me anxious. "What's wrong?" Michael sat down across from me in my living room, clasping his hands in his lap the way he had done as a child when he was about to confess to breaking something. "I ran into Jake and Sandra last week," he said carefully. "They were at the car dealership where my friend works, trying to trade in Jake's current car for something less expensive." "Okay," I said, not sure where this was leading. "Mom, Jake's car is only 3 years old and in perfect condition. There's absolutely nothing wrong with it. My friend said it's one of the most reliable models that dealership sells, and it has all the features anyone could need." I felt a cold knot forming in my stomach. "What are you telling me, Michael?" "I'm telling you that Jake lied to you. The story about needing a new car because his current one was unreliable and embarrassing? None of that was true. He just wanted a more expensive car because Sandra decided that their current one wasn't impressive enough." The revelation hit me like a physical blow. All of Jake's talk about career pressure and professional image and needing reliable transportation, it had all been fabrication designed to manipulate me into funding his wife's social aspirations. "Are you sure about this?" I asked weakly. "Completely sure. My friend showed me the service records for Jake's car. It's been maintained perfectly, has never had any mechanical problems, and is actually worth more now than when Jake bought it because it's such a popular model." I sat there absorbing this information, feeling a mix of vindication and heartbreak. Vindication because my instincts about Jake's request had been correct, it wasn't about need but about want. Heartbreak because it confirmed that my own son had looked me in the eye and lied to manipulate me into giving him money. "There's more," Michael continued reluctantly. "My friend also told me that Jake originally tried to qualify for financing for the BMW on his own, but he was turned down because of his credit score and debt-to-income ratio." "What does that mean?" "It means Jake and Sandra are living beyond their means. They have so much credit card debt and so little disposable income that no bank would loan them money for a luxury car purchase. The only way Jake could get that BMW was if you paid cash for it." The full scope of the deception was becoming clear. Jake hadn't just lied about needing a new car, he had lied about being able to afford one. His demand for $75,000 wasn't about professional necessity or even personal desire. It was about circumventing financial institutions that had already determined he was too much of a credit risk to loan money to. "Michael, why are you telling me this now?" Michael looked uncomfortable, shifting in his chair and avoiding my eyes. "Because I heard through Sandra's sister that they're planning to try again. They think enough time has passed that you might be willing to reconsider, especially if they approach it differently." "What do you mean, approach it differently?" "They're planning to wait until Tommy's birthday next month, then use the party as an opportunity to put you in a position where saying no would seem cruel and selfish in front of the whole family." The manipulation was breathtaking in its calculation. They were planning to use my grandson's birthday party as a platform for emotional blackmail, counting on my desire to avoid family conflict to override my financial judgment. "Mom," Michael continued, "I'm telling you this because I don't want to see you get ambushed. And also because I think you should know the truth about Jake's financial situation before you make any decisions about helping him in the future." That night, I lay awake thinking about deception and manipulation and the lengths that Jake and Sandra were willing to go to access my money. The fake emergency, the manufactured crisis, the planned emotional ambush at a child's birthday party, all of it revealed a level of calculated selfishness that I had never imagined my own son was capable of. But it also revealed something else. The fact that they were planning another approach meant that my original refusal had hit them harder than they had expected. Without access to my money, their financial situation was apparently desperate enough that they were willing to risk further family conflict rather than adjust their lifestyle to match their actual income. The next morning, I made a decision that would have seemed impossible a year earlier. I called Jake directly, something I had rarely done since the Miami confrontation. "Mom?" His voice was surprised, hopeful, and wary all at once. "Jake, I'm calling because I heard about Tommy's birthday party next month, and I wanted to let you know that I won't be attending." There was a long pause. "Why not?" "It's your grandson's birthday." "Because I understand that the party is intended as an opportunity for you to pressure me about financial support, and I don't want Tommy's celebration to be overshadowed by adult conflicts." "I have no idea what you're talking about," Jake said, but his voice lacked conviction. "Jake, I know about your current car. I know it's in perfect condition and that you haven't been able to qualify for financing on your own. I know that your requests for money aren't about genuine need but about wanting to live beyond your means." The silence stretched so long that I wondered if he had hung up. When he finally spoke, his voice was different, harder, more honest, without the pretense of manipulation. "Fine. You want the truth? Yes, I want a nicer car. Yes, Sandra thinks our current car reflects poorly on our social status. And yes, I asked you for money because I knew you had it and I thought a loving mother would want to help her son succeed. Jake, I do want to help you succeed. But paying for luxury purchases that you can't afford isn't helping you succeed, it's helping you fail by avoiding the reality of your financial situation. So what, you're just going to let me struggle while you sit on millions of dollars? I'm going to let you learn what every other adult learns, how to live within your means and work for the things you want. Jake was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke again, his voice was resigned rather than angry. Mom, I don't think we can have a relationship if you're not willing to help me when I need it. Jake, I'll always help you in genuine emergencies. But wanting a BMW isn't an emergency. It is to me, he said quietly, and hung up. I sat there holding the phone, feeling sad but not surprised. Jake had finally been honest about his priorities, and they didn't include having a relationship with me unless I was willing to fund his lifestyle. In a way, his honesty was a gift. It removed any doubt about whether I was making the right decision. 2 weeks later, I received a birthday invitation for Tommy's party, a beautiful, expensive-looking card that must have cost more per invitation than I spent on birthday cards for myself. The party was at an upscale restaurant in Manhattan, with what appeared to be an elaborate menu and entertainment planned. I RSVP'd that I wouldn't be attending, but I sent Tommy a thoughtful gift, a collection of books about art and travel that I thought he might enjoy. I included a note telling him I loved him and hoped he had a wonderful celebration. The day after the party, Clara called me. Her voice was subdued, and I could tell she was upset. Grandma Ellie, I'm really sorry you missed Tommy's party. It felt weird not having you there. How was it, sweetheart? Clara was quiet for a moment. It was really fancy. Like, probably too fancy for a 9-year-old's birthday party. And expensive. Aunt Lisa said the restaurant probably cost more than most people spend on weddings. Did everyone have a good time? I think so, but it was kind of awkward because everyone kept asking where you were. Dad said you were being stubborn about family issues, but Aunt Lisa told everyone that you were traveling and couldn't make it. I appreciated Lisa's attempt to shield me from family gossip, but I was more concerned about Clara's obvious discomfort with the situation. Clara, do you understand why I couldn't come to the party? Kind of. Dad explained that you guys have been fighting about money, and he said that you've decided not to help your family anymore when they need it. The manipulation continued, even with my granddaughter. Jake was framing my boundaries as abandonment, my fiscal responsibility as selfishness, my reasonable limits as family betrayal. Sweetheart, that's not exactly accurate. I'm always willing to help in genuine emergencies, but I'm not able to fund lifestyle choices and luxury purchases anymore. What's the difference? It was a good question, and I took time to think before answering. Well, if someone was sick and needed money for medical treatment, that would be an emergency. If someone lost their job and needed help with groceries or rent, that might be an emergency. But if someone wants a more expensive car just because they think it would make them look more successful, that's a lifestyle choice. Clara was quiet, processing this distinction. Finally, she said, that makes sense. I guess I never thought about it that way before. Your dad isn't wrong that I'm not willing to provide the same kind of financial support I used to. But that's because I've learned that constant financial help doesn't actually help people. It teaches them to depend on someone else instead of learning to take care of themselves. Like when my mom told me I had to get a summer job instead of just giving me money for clothes and movies? Exactly like that. Your mom could afford to give you spending money, but she knew you'd learn more and appreciate things more if you earned them yourself. Dad probably wouldn't like that comparison, Clara said with a slight laugh. Probably not. But your mom understands something that took me too long to learn, that loving someone sometimes means saying no to them. After I hung up with Clara, I realized that this conversation had clarified something important for me. Jake wasn't just asking for financial support, he was asking to be excused from the normal adult responsibility of living within his means. He wanted to enjoy the lifestyle and status symbols of someone who earned more money than he did, but without actually earning that money or making the sacrifices necessary to afford those luxuries. And he wanted me to fund the gap between his income and his aspirations, indefinitely, without question or complaint. The realization was both liberating and heartbreaking. Liberating because it confirmed that my boundaries were not only reasonable but necessary. Heartbreaking because it meant that Jake saw me not as his mother but as an obstacle to the lifestyle he felt entitled to live. As summer turned to fall, I settled into a routine that revolved entirely around my own interests and needs. I took a painting class at the community center, joined a book club at the library, and started volunteering at a local senior center. For the first time in decades, my calendar was filled with activities I enjoyed rather than obligations to other people. I also began to notice changes in my relationships with my other children. Without the constant drama and financial crisis management that Jake's requests had created, Lisa and I talked more often and about more varied topics. Michael visited more frequently, often bringing small gifts or flowers just because he wanted to, rather than because he needed something. Even my relationship with Clara deepened. Without the tension and conflict that family money issues had created, she felt more comfortable calling just to chat about school and friends and her plans for college. Our conversations were lighter, more genuine, focused on shared interests rather than family politics. But the most significant change was in my relationship with myself. For the first time in years, I was making decisions based on my own preferences rather than other people's expectations. I bought clothes I liked instead of saving money for family gifts. I planned weekend activities based on my interests rather than family obligations. I even started dating again, something I hadn't done since Robert died. His name was Frank, a retired mathematics professor I met at my painting class. He was a widower like me, with grown children who lived independent lives and visited regularly but didn't expect him to fund their lifestyles. Our relationship developed slowly, based on shared interests and compatible personalities rather than need or obligation. Frank was fascinated by my family situation when I eventually told him about it. As someone who had taught young adults for 40 years, he had strong opinions about financial independence and personal responsibility. "Eleanor," he said one evening as we shared dinner at a cozy Italian restaurant in Little Italy, "you did exactly the right thing. I've seen too many students whose parents paid for everything, and they were invariably less motivated, less capable, and less appreciative than the students who had to work for what they wanted. Sometimes I wonder if I was too harsh," I admitted. "Jake is still my son, and I do love him. Love doesn't mean enabling someone to avoid the consequences of their choices. In fact, real love sometimes requires letting people experience those consequences so they can learn and grow." Frank's perspective was refreshing because it came from someone who had no financial or emotional investment in my family drama. His objectivity helped me see that my guilt about Jake was misplaced. I wasn't responsible for his financial problems or his inability to cope with normal adult responsibilities. As winter approached, marking almost a full year since the Miami confrontation, I reflected on how much my life had changed. I was healthier, happier, and more financially secure than I had been in years. I had rediscovered interests and dreams that I had abandoned in favor of family caregiving. I had developed new relationships based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. But I had also lost my relationship with Jake and, by extension, my connection to Tommy and Jake Jr. That loss still hurt, probably always would. But I had learned to distinguish between healthy sadness over a difficult situation and toxic guilt over reasonable decisions. The test of my growth came in December, exactly 1 year after Jake's BMW demand. Sandra called me, her voice carefully modulated to sound casual and friendly. "Hi, Eleanor. I hope you're doing well. I'm calling because we're planning Christmas again this year, and we wanted to see if you'd like to join us." The invitation was clearly a strategic move, designed to seem magnanimous while actually setting up another opportunity for manipulation. I could almost hear the calculation behind it. If I agreed to join their Christmas celebration, they could interpret it as a sign that I was ready to resume financial support. If I declined, they could tell family and friends that I was the one choosing to remain estranged. "Thank you for the invitation, Sandra, but I've made other plans for Christmas." "Oh, that's disappointing. What are your plans, if you don't mind me asking?" "I'm spending Christmas in Italy with a friend." The silence on the other end of the phone was telling. Sandra had clearly not expected me to have independent plans, especially plans that involved international travel and companionship. "Italy? That sounds expensive." "It's a wonderful way to spend the holidays," I replied, refusing to take the bait about money. "Well, I guess if you can afford to spend money on luxury vacations, you could have afforded to help Jake when he needed it." There it was, the real purpose of the call. Not to genuinely invite me to Christmas, but to probe my financial situation and attempt to make me feel guilty for spending money on myself instead of on Jake's desires. "Sandra, I hope you and the boys have a lovely Christmas. Please give them my love." I hung up before she could respond. That evening, I called Frank to confirm our travel plans. We had decided to spend 3 weeks in Italy, visiting Rome for Christmas and then traveling north to Venice and the Italian Lakes region. It would be the most extravagant trip of my life, and also the most deserved. "Are you excited about Rome at Christmas?" Frank asked. "I can't wait. Did you know that St. Peter's Basilica has midnight mass on Christmas Eve? I've always wanted to experience Christmas in a place where the history is so tangible. I think this trip is going to be perfect for both of us," Frank said warmly. Two people who spent most of their lives taking care of everyone else, finally taking care of ourselves. Christmas in Rome was everything I had dreamed it would be. Frank and I attended midnight mass at St. Peter's, wandered through ancient ruins decorated with holiday lights, and shared quiet dinners at tiny family-owned restaurants. We talked about art and history and our shared experience of learning to prioritize our own happiness after decades of living for others. On Christmas Day, as we sat in a sunny cafe near the Pantheon sharing a bottle of Prosecco and watching Roman families stroll past in their holiday finery, I realized that this was the first Christmas in years where I hadn't spent weeks planning elaborate celebrations for people who barely acknowledged my efforts. "Eleanor," Frank said, raising his glass, "here's to the courage it takes to choose yourself. And to the wisdom to know the difference between selfishness and self-preservation," I replied. As we toasted, my phone buzzed with messages. Christmas greetings from Lisa and Clara, warm and loving and free of any financial implications. A photo from Michael of the Christmas cookies he had made using a recipe I had taught him years ago. And, surprisingly, a brief text from Jake, "Merry Christmas, Mom. Hope you're well." The message was neutral, neither warm nor hostile. But it was the first communication I had received from Jake in months that didn't involve money or manipulation. I chose to interpret it as a small sign of growth, perhaps the beginning of a relationship based on something other than financial transactions. I texted back, "Merry Christmas, Jake. I love you." His response came an hour later, "Love you too, Mom." It wasn't much, but it was something. Maybe, eventually, it could become the foundation for a healthier relationship, one based on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. As Frank and I walked hand in hand through the cobblestone streets of Trastevere that evening, watching Italian families gather in warm, welcoming restaurants, I reflected on the journey that had brought me to this place. A year ago, I had been a walking ATM, valued primarily for my willingness to fund other people's lifestyle choices. Now I was a woman discovering her own worth, pursuing her own dreams, building relationships based on genuine affection rather than financial convenience. The path had been painful. Setting boundaries with Jake had cost me access to my grandchildren, at least temporarily. Standing up for myself had exposed the transactional nature of relationships I had thought were based on love. Learning to say no had revealed just how much of my identity had been tied up in being useful to others. But the pain had been worth it. On the other side of that difficult year, I had found peace, joy, and authentic relationships. I had rediscovered parts of myself that had been buried under decades of caretaking and people-pleasing. I had learned the difference between being generous and being exploited, between helping someone and enabling them. Most importantly, I had learned that I was worthy of love and respect even when I wasn't funding someone else's dreams. That I deserved to spend my money on my own happiness. That I had the right to prioritize my own security and well-being. As we returned to our hotel that Christmas night, passing the Trevi Fountain where hundreds of tourists were making wishes and tossing coins into the illuminated water, I realized that I didn't need to make a wish. For the first time in years, I was living exactly the life I wanted to live. 3 months later, back in New York, I received an unexpected visitor. Jake appeared at my door on a rainy Saturday afternoon, looking older and more serious than I remembered. He was alone, no Sandra, no children, just my son standing in my hallway with his hands in his pockets and uncertainty in his eyes. "Hi, Mom. I wondered if we could talk." I invited him in, offered coffee, and waited. We sat in my small living room, surrounded by the paintings I had created during my year of self-discovery and the souvenirs from my travels with Frank. The space looked different than it had during Jake's previous visits, more personal, more alive, more distinctly mine. Jake looked around, taking in the changes. His eyes lingered on a watercolor I had painted of the Tuscan countryside and a photograph of Frank and me at the Colosseum in Rome. "You look happy," he said quietly. "I am happy." Jake was quiet for a long moment, turning his coffee cup between his hands. Finally, he looked up and met my eyes directly. "Mom, I owe you an apology. Not because I think you'll change your mind about the money, but because I treated you badly and you didn't deserve it." The words caught me by surprise. In all our conflicts over the past year, Jake had never acknowledged that his behavior might have been inappropriate. "What changed your mind?" I asked carefully. "A few things. Sandra and I have been going to marriage counseling because we were fighting constantly about money and blame and whose fault it was that we couldn't afford the lifestyle we wanted. Our counselor helped me understand some things about myself that were hard to accept." "Such as?" Jake took a deep breath. "Such as the fact that I had started thinking of you as my financial backup plan instead of my mother. That I only called you when I needed something. That I was angry at you for having money that you didn't give me, which is objectively crazy when I say it out loud." I felt a cautious hope stirring in my chest. This was the most honest and self-aware conversation Jake and I had had in years. "Also," Jake continued, "Sandra's parents cut us off financially last month. They said we were old enough to handle our own problems and that constantly bailing us out wasn't helping us learn responsibility." Sound familiar? Despite the seriousness of the conversation, I almost smiled. Very familiar. When they said no to us, I was furious. I felt betrayed and abandoned, like they didn't love us enough to help when we really needed it. Then I realized that was probably exactly how I had made you feel when you said no to the BMW. Jake paused, looking out my window at the busy Queen Street below. Mom, I want you to know that I understand now why you said no. Not just about the car, but about everything. Sandra and I have spent the past 6 months learning to live within our actual income instead of the income we wished we had, and it's been good for us. Hard, but good. How so? We've learned to distinguish between things we want and things we need. We've gotten better at saving money and making thoughtful purchasing decisions. We've stopped using credit cards for everything and started actually budgeting our expenses. Basic adult stuff that we should have figured out years ago. I felt proud of Jake for the first time in a long time. That sounds like real progress. It is. And Mom, I want you to know that I don't expect anything to change between us just because I apologized. I know I damaged our relationship, and I know trust has to be rebuilt over time. But I was hoping maybe we could start somewhere. What did you have in mind? Jake smiled for the first time since he had arrived. Well, Tommy's been asking about Grandma Ellie a lot. He still has the books you sent for his birthday, and he's been reading them. He wanted to know if you would maybe come to his baseball game next weekend. Not a big family gathering, just a little league game on Saturday morning. The invitation was so simple, so free of financial implications or hidden agendas, that it brought tears to my eyes. This was what I had been missing, the opportunity to be a grandmother without being an ATM. I would love to come to Tommy's baseball game. Great. And Mom, one more thing. I've been wondering if you might be willing to tell me about your trip to Italy. Not because I want anything, just because I'm curious about your life. I feel like I haven't asked you about your own interests and experiences in years. And so we spent the next hour talking about art and travel and the books I had been reading and the volunteer work that had become important to me. Jake listened with genuine interest, asked thoughtful questions, and shared details about his own life that had nothing to do with money or problems or requests for help. It was the kind of conversation I had been hoping to have with my son for years. When Jake got up to leave, he paused at the door. Mom, I know this is probably too little too late, but I want you to know that I'm proud of you for standing up to me. It took courage, and I needed to learn the lessons that came from it. It wasn't easy, I admitted. I know. But it was the right thing to do, both for you and for me. After Jake left, I called Frank to tell him about the unexpected visit. His response was characteristically wise. Growth is slow and sometimes painful, but it's usually worth the wait. Tommy's baseball game the following Saturday was a revelation. I sat in the bleachers with other grandparents, cheering for 9-year-olds who were more interested in the post-game snacks than their batting averages. Tommy ran over to hug me after the game, excited to introduce me to his friends as his grandmother who had been to Italy. Jake and Sandra were cordial but not presumptuous. They thanked me for coming, included me in their post-game lunch plans, but made no requests or hints about money. The conversation stayed focused on Tommy's interests, school activities, and upcoming summer plans. It was exactly the kind of family interaction I had hoped for, relaxed, genuine, free of financial undertones. Over the following months, my relationship with Jake continued to improve gradually. We talked on the phone occasionally, usually about neutral topics like the kids' activities or current events. He invited me to family gatherings but didn't pressure me when I had other plans. Most importantly, he never asked for money. I learned through Lisa that Jake and Sandra had made significant lifestyle changes. They had moved to a smaller, more affordable apartment and enrolled in a financial literacy course. They were working with a debt counselor to pay off their credit cards and had started a college savings account for the boys. Sandra had gotten a part-time job to supplement their income, and Jake had begun taking on freelance projects in addition to his regular employment. It wasn't the lifestyle they had wanted, but it was sustainable and honest and built on their actual earnings rather than borrowed or gifted money. 1 year after Jake's apology, Frank and I decided to get married. It was a small ceremony in Central Park, attended by Lisa, Michael, Clara, and to my surprise and delight, Jake and his family. Tommy and Jake Jr. served as ring bearers, excited to be part of their grandmother's wedding. At the reception dinner, Jake stood up to make a toast. His words were brief but heartfelt, to Eleanor and Frank, who found love by first learning to love themselves. Thank you for showing all of us that it's never too late to put your own happiness first. As I look back on this journey now, I understand that Jake's demand for $75,000 was actually a gift. It forced me to confront the unhealthy dynamics I had allowed to develop in my family relationships. It taught me the difference between supporting someone and enabling them. Most importantly, it helped me rediscover my own worth as a person rather than just as a source of financial assistance. I learned that saying no to unreasonable requests isn't selfish, it's self-preservation. That love shouldn't require financial transactions to validate it. That healthy relationships are built on mutual respect rather than financial dependency. I also learned that it's possible to change family patterns even late in life, but it requires courage to set boundaries and consistency in maintaining them. Some people will respect those boundaries and adjust their behavior accordingly. Others will reveal that they were never interested in a genuine relationship, only in access to resources. The most important lesson, though, was that I am worthy of love and respect simply by virtue of being human. Not because of what I can provide, not because of how useful I am to others, but because I have inherent value as an individual. That realization changed everything. It allowed me to build authentic relationships based on genuine affection. It gave me permission to pursue my own dreams and interests. It freed me from the exhausting cycle of trying to buy love through financial generosity. Today, my relationships with all my children are healthier than they've been in years. Lisa and I travel together occasionally, exploring art museums and cultural sites that interest us both. Michael brings his girlfriend for Sunday dinners, often cooking elaborate meals in my small kitchen while we laugh and talk about everything and nothing. Clara, now in college, calls regularly to share her adventures and ask for advice about school and relationships and her own emerging independence. And Jake? Jake has become the son I always hoped he would be. He calls to check on my well-being, remembers my birthday, includes me in family activities without expecting me to fund them. His children know me as their grandmother who paints pictures and travels to exotic places and loves them unconditionally, not as the lady who brings expensive presents. Our relationship isn't built on money anymore, it's built on respect, affection, and genuine care for each other's well-being. It took a crisis to get here, but it was worth every difficult moment along the way. Frank and I are planning another trip to Italy this spring. We're also considering buying a small apartment there, a place where we can spend several months each year exploring art and culture and the kind of leisurely lifestyle that good financial planning and wise choices make possible. My investments continue to perform well, my retirement security is stronger than ever, and I have the satisfaction of knowing that I'm spending my money on experiences and relationships that bring genuine joy rather than on attempts to purchase affection from people who should love me freely. The best part is that I sleep peacefully now. No more middle-of-the-night anxiety about family financial crises. No more guilt about whether I'm helping enough or giving enough or sacrificing enough. No more confusion about the difference between love and money. I wake up each morning excited about the day ahead, not because someone needs something from me, but because I've finally learned what it means to live for myself while still maintaining loving relationships with the people who truly matter. Have you ever lived, or known someone who has lived, something like this? Have you found yourself in a relationship where love seemed to require constant financial sacrifice, where saying no felt impossible even when saying yes was draining your resources and your peace of mind? Please, share your story in the comments. Your experience might help someone else find the courage to set boundaries and prioritize their own well-being. If this story resonated with you, please like this video and subscribe to my channel. Together, maybe we can help each other remember that we are worthy of love that doesn't come with a price tag attached.